This is the 72nd Test from the Future, an experimental podcast from the year 2222, which we are sending from our present to yours. My name is Simon.
And my name is Dirk.
And we're putting the past in podcast.
Yeah, nice.
Flipping it up.
I see you've had practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had a couple of weeks ago for the first time, and now I've been thinking about it, getting a bit smoother in it. It still feels a bit strange though, yeah, like I'm so used to you saying that, not me.
I'm sitting here being super patient. This is the bit where I'm supposed to be starting talking, and I have to shut up. So
we flipped it that way around because today. Should we go straight into the subject?
Yeah.
Today, I know so little about the subject. I don't even know enough to make jibber jabber up, or to sound knowledgeable. So you're going to be the one talking about the subject, and I'll ask questions.
I'm not the super expert, but as far as I understand you, I definitely know
much
a
more
bit
than I do. Yeah. But so I can introduce the subject.
Yeah.
So today we're talking about some technology. Recent technology, but that did not end up working properly at all. That really went messed up. Often we've talked about stuff that, it's successful, it's old news, whatever, or even it's new news, but, it's going well.
Or it kind of works,
Sure.
but there are still some problems.
Yeah, but in this case, it was a big disaster.
Yeah.
And what is it we're talking about? Talking about weather control.
Yeah.
All kinds of different ways of it being done that you'll go into detail. But sure, the general idea was to control the weather.
Yeah.
And some techniques were on a local level, just trying to control it in one region, one country maybe. And others were more holistic, imagine trying to control the weather systems of the entire Earth. And none of them worked out.
I think the idea was, encourageable. You understand, like we can basically decide everything. Why not the weather?
Well, like for growing food, for example. Hey, let's have the ideal weather for growing food in this region. That we don't have a drought or too much rain or whatever.
Yeah.
That was one of the main reasons behind it.
I think, before we get into details, I think the problem wasn't just one thing, right? It wasn't just the technology or the time it was...
Right, no, in that sense, the technology, I think, at the start it was a mess, but they did have some pretty good technology working later, yeah. But the problem, as I understand it, was that no one really agreed on what ideal weather was.
I think that should have already have been a sign for the people to think, okay, maybe this is not a good idea. But it's true, yeah. It's for the listeners, maybe it was initially government initiated in combination with corporations, and especially initially everybody was super enthusiastic. It's basically the next thing.
Yeah.
We've done space travel, we've done teleportation.
All kinds of interior climates were totally like you said. So obviously first in buildings, but then spaceships. Like that's the ultimate controlled environment. So this was like the next logical step.
And a lot of things about our life are so nice, There's a lot of every decade it felt like some annoying bit of our life is no longer necessary.
Has been solved.
Yeah, exactly. It has been solved. Like we don't need to cut our nails anymore, or we don't need to worry about
getting haircuts,
war or food or energy or haircuts.
All important things.
And then the next thing is you go outside and it rains.
Yeah.
Okay, sure, you can teleport there, but sometimes you just like to be outside, but not when it rains. Or maybe you want to be outside when it rains and it's sunny, it's annoying.
Yeah.
So obviously everybody agreed it's a good idea to influence this. But that's the last bit everybody agreed on.
Yeah. Everyone wanted to be able to control their own weather, and the problem was that it's not somehow isolated, yeah? Like controlling your weather affects the weather around you.
Exactly, like neighbors wants to lay in the pool. It's nice if it's hot and warm. If you grow your own food, a lot of people still do this. It helps if it rains occasionally. And of course, if somebody's just enjoying the sun, they don't like it rain. And you can't obviously not have it on a garden level. Like the whole street, every garden has their own weather. It doesn't work like that. And then first they tried it on a governmental level. Like the government can decide. But the scientists didn't even agree.
Sure.
You know, how often does it need to rain? How often does it need to be cold? How often does the temperature change? Do the tomatoes get better? Do the swimming pools get better? So they didn't even agree, and then within the countries they didn't agree, and then the companies didn't agree, and then the people didn't agree, and then nobody really agreed. And then,
Yeah, and before, I mean, because then when all this disagreement was happening, it's because different things were being tried out, and so people were controlling the weather, yeah? And sure, maybe so in their area they were happy, but the neighbouring regions weren't. And the...
I think what happened is, in the end, they didn't decide on a situation where everybody get to decide whatever their own local weather was. They just said, what's the best for the climate that you're in? So no extremes, no surprises, and just weather that everybody's prepared for. So not suddenly a snowstorm in the middle of the summer or floods or whatever. So let's just have smooth transitions.
Yeah.
It needs to rain occasionally. Let's just plan when it rains. It needs to be cold at some point. Let's plan.
So like making an ideal version of what the weather had been ideally before.
Yeah, exactly. And also, let's say, normally it's, I'm just picking Germany as an example, it's annoyingly cold between, let's say, November and March or so.
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, but does it really have to be annoyingly cold, or can it be slightly cool,
just a little cold,
December and January? And then that's also what they were experimenting with. What happens if it's like, if the weather is much more nicer, much more of the time, what does it have? What effect does it have? And then, but that's when things started spinning out of control.
Yeah, they couldn't account for all the variables.
Yeah,
within maybe some smaller region they could, but they couldn't. Couldn't be taken into account how that would affect everywhere else.
And I think actually sticking to Germany, they did do some of the early experiments in Germany and Poland. There was some sort of pilot area. And then they did actually have early success where the weather was much calmer, smoother transitions.
Because that was, so those two countries, that region was the only place it was being really done worldwide.
Exactly, but then it had really bad side effects on, for example, France, where it just felt like all the extremities that Germany and Poland would occasionally have were kind of pushed out. So France, Denmark, whatever, they had much more extreme weather.
Right.
And then I think specifically France and Denmark were then included in the pilot. And then the next countries, Netherlands, Norway, they had not just the extreme weather that Denmark and France were having before, but then more of that. Yeah. Because it has also had to, so it felt like just the world needs to have weather extremities.
I see.
And when they started doing local experiments everywhere, they just pushed the extremities around.
Yeah.
And the places where the weather was super controlled were just dramatically having a negative effect in other regions.
I see, yeah. Sure, and that was, so it's, as you're describing it, it's an experiment, yeah? But the downside is it's an experiment in the real world, and so when things went bad, it, hurt a lot of people.
Yeah, exactly. It's, I think I still remember the storms in Argentina. I think you couldn't go to Argentina for a few years, teleport there. Was it Argentina?
They were damaged? The teleporters were damaged? Or was it just too dangerous there?
Yeah, no, it was the network. Like teleporting there itself was just like some reason you had a really hard time going
maybe
through.
Because of all the lightning storms.
Exactly, that was it. Lightning storms, yeah. And that was the case for Argentina. So you had to actually, when you would go there, you would take a car. And sometimes it wasn't stormy, but most of the time it was stormy. And there was a period where it was stormy nonstop.
Yeah.
And of course you had the volcanic eruptions. And I think there was...
Sure, and those eruptions weren't caused by the weather, but the type of weather that was going on exacerbated the problems from the ash going into the atmosphere.
And also somehow when it pushed the extremities, you basically, it was Italy, exactly. There were a bunch of volcanic eruptions in Italy at the time where they would occasionally have them, but because the extremities being pushed around, they had a lot of them, which looked great, I've been told.
Yeah, made for some nice sunsets.
Exactly, and some nights that weren't really dark, because if you have like I don't know how many, like a dozen volcanoes erupting, then it doesn't really get dark. No, it made for a real nice fireworks.
I mean, from the lava, yeah, but from the ash clouds, those blocked out the sky. So
yeah, that's true. Like initially, but yeah, you're right. And then there were places that were just frozen over. There have been a few summers where you could walk from South Africa to Antarctica.
Across the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
Whoa.
Yeah, and apparently that's like in history, like the North Pole used to be unfrozen, then frozen again, and so on. But the ocean between South Africa and Antarctica had never been frozen until then. So,
right.
I mean, the South Africans, they really took it as an opportunity, even to host the Winter Olympics there. You know, it's like I think it's the only real big sports event that was held in Antarctica and South Africa as a combined effort.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, these were some of the extremities, and then also the technology. They kept changing it. They even tried scandium.
Okay, yeah, make use of it.
Yeah, but turned out wasn't useful at all.
Sure.
Yeah, so they and then I don't remember most of the technologies, but even at one point, they gave up.
It was just there were too many problems. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's like you iterate, you know, like you improve, you make something better, and then sometimes you make a step back, you make 2 steps forward, but this time it kept getting worse. Everything they tried made it worse, and I think they classify this now as probably not possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's they've had it, and I remember twice where he really officially said, this is probably not possible, you know?
Yeah, even after all the work that's been put into it, all the experiments, all the different technologies, but in the end it's not something, it's too complex.
Yeah, but come to think of it, like the main bulk of this was a few decades ago.
Sure.
And
a lot of things have improved by now since then.
Yeah, and also the aliens hadn't landed yet.
Right.
So I'm wondering...
It was all before their assistance.
Yeah, I know the Illuminatis, their planet doesn't rotate, so I'm not even sure if they have weather. But it would be interesting to see if the Parsons can control their weather. Maybe they have a few tips. But I think the topic is burned. I don't think anybody wants to try it again.
But that was a thing where you mentioned earlier how initially it was governments, and one of the problems with governments being in control of it before it became private enterprise. And one of the things with that was that then, especially coming up to elections, the party in power often wanted to keep the weather nice, you know, so they could have really good days for giving speeches or whatever. But yeah, okay, having, like you mentioned, having nice days all the time causes other problems.
And also you're right, they also used it in their election program, where they would say, hey, vote for me, I'm going to make the weather nice. And everybody loves that. Check out how beautiful day this is. You elect me, you can have this day.
Yeah, so in addition to the system itself being too complex to actually do realistically anyway, but on top of that, you had petty reasons for making the weather certain ways.
I've been thinking about this. I imagine if I were able to control the weather, I thought of this, and my first thought was, I don't need the weather to be nice everywhere. I'm fine if it's stormy or rainy or cold, you know, everywhere else.
Sure, and I think a lot of people may think that way.
And if I go for my morning run, I'm happy for it to just be nice weather in Botswana or Tibet or wherever I'm running, you know. But it can be raining somewhere else. Maybe we can just all agree on just briefly move somewhere else, and then, you know.
I mean, if it wasn't for human relationships and people wanting to live close to people they want to live close to, sure. But people want that, so not so much. It's the kind of idea that appeals if you imagine, let's say you're colonizing a new planet, yeah? No one's there already. Okay, let's settle it, make this region the place with all the rain, this place with all the sun, and then people who like rain live over here, people who like sun live over here, and so on, for example. But not for a planet already established, such as Earth.
I think the real end of it was when the corporations found the the niche, or it's not a niche anymore, of second and third homes. You know, it's like if the weather is nice wherever people are, they don't move. They don't.
Well, there's much less of a need to,
exactly,
or
they don't
a
need
desire
to.
to.
Exactly, they don't need to relocate. They don't need a second or a third home somewhere else where the weather is alternatively nice. And then they started making a lot of money with this, saying like, if the weather is bad in Germany, why don't you move to Malaysia? You know, or why don't you buy a second home in Malaysia?
Yeah.
Or Alaska, or whatever the weather. Yeah, and then you can basically see in which of my 3 homes is the weather nice, and not just have breakfast there. And that turns out is a lot easier.
Yeah, and so it was in their interests that the weather not be so controlled and not so predictable.
Did you know the anti-rain force fields, like the miniature ones that you can carry around?
Yeah, right. That was one of the nice offshoots.
Yeah, I think this is really
The lasting legacy.
Yeah, exactly. This is really in the history books,
the positive legacy.
The one good thing that came out of this, where they managed to. It's basically something that you can activate around you if you're outside where it's raining and you don't want to get wet.
Yeah, around you, or if you have you hang up some clothes to dry.
Yeah.
And you don't want to, you know it might rain, but you don't know for sure. Put a force field around them, and then even if it rains, they'll stay dry. They'll dry and not get wet.
Or if your car is made of paper.
Sure.
I think, but that's really it's forever tied to this phenomenon, and they call it under the weather.
Right.
For some reason.
Yeah, referring to that period. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, where the whole world was under the weather. But it's a couple of decades ago now, so
Sure.
I think they still had effects for a few years, but it kind of wore off. You know, it's kind of interesting how the Earth seemed to be resilient.
Sure, over the weather systems.
Yeah,
by now they have, stabilized.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really okay. We stopped messing with it. A couple of years later, you know, it found its balance again. So, yeah. I would
Trying to think if there's anything else, but nothing springs to mind.
No. Nope.
So it was a funny thing. I just remembered one thing which I read about, which was just early on. Weather forecasters thought they'd be out of a job because
True.
At least in the sense of their job actually being to predict the weather. I mean, sure, there would be people announcing the weather based on what it would actually be. Anyway, they didn't go out of a job, especially when everything all got messed up. Their jobs were even more exciting.
Everybody was running to them. Oh,
Yeah.
what's going on?
And by now, as we mentioned, things are stable, are back to how they were, so they have a job.
And also, in the beginning, they were all hired by the big corporation producing the technology, because if you know what the weather is going to be, and then if you're the one actually deciding what the weather is going to be, then you know you're an even better forecaster, because you say it's going to be sunny tomorrow, and then you press the button and it's sunny.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Anyway, it didn't work out that way in the end, but it was interesting in its time.
If anybody ever tries to revisit it, and then you know if stuff actually happens, we can have a follow-up episode.
Sure.
They're trying again. You know, it's you know the whole.
It's working out this time.
All Frankfurt is frozen over.
It's not working out this time.
Something along those lines. Okay. We also had a listener question.
Yep. Let me read that. So this is a question from Osman. No last name given, just Osman, and they ask, how come the image in my podcast app sometimes briefly changes during the episode? I can't make heads or tails of that.
I also have no idea. So
we send a podcast back in time, and I guess a podcast app is what this person's using to listen to it, but we're not doing anything with images.
No.
Just audio. That's
exactly, we just send
audio and ID-free text. That's all we can send back, but no images.
Okay, so either
Maybe
Osman, Osman, maybe you have a problem with your app. Maybe your app is broken.
Yeah, right. That could be it. Or maybe it's like someone's making like a bootleg copy of our podcast, adding in images. Seems a bit rude. If you're doing that, don't do that. What are the images? Osman doesn't say what the images are of.
No, it just says how come they change sometimes. Maybe that's what all podcast episodes do in the 21st century.
Maybe it's like procedurally generated images based on whatever the people are talking about.
Yeah, exactly. And then maybe
and Osman just doesn't know about that. So Osman, that's totally what it must be. Yeah, procedurally generated artwork.
Just listen to a few other podcasts, and then you'll probably, hopefully, see that this happens there as well. If we're misunderstanding anything, or if you have any more information, we're happy to try to answer.
That's true. And I was about to say how people can contact us, but since we flipped the beginning of the episode, would you like to give it a go yourself?
I can say that. Yeah. So, dear listeners, we really appreciate you sending us emails, not just because then we can have fun things to answer or not answer in this case, but also because then we know that this test reached the 21st century, or whichever century you're in, because we're still seeing these as tests. We're sending them back in the past, and time travel is not trivial. So we'd like to know if they arrived, and all we ask is that you send us an email with the episode number in the subject, and the email goes to michaellasagna5@gmail.com. And if you put the episode number in the subject, 72 in this case, then we'll at least know episode 72 made it to the past. And you don't need to put anything else in there, but if you have anything interesting to mention or ask, please do that. And then because we have access to these emails. And the tricky thing is, of course, at the moment we don't have any episodes with 70 or any emails with 72 in the subject.
Not yet, no.
Because we haven't released it. But the moment you send us an email, suddenly we have this in our inbox 200 years ago.
Yeah, right. We can't see it until there's some stuff going on there.
Yeah, so we can't answer because we're here 200 years in the future. But we can answer on air.
Exactly, we can respond.
Yeah, so we're not being rude by not answering. We haven't been born yet.
I was a bit mixed up there. Right, you mean answering, like sending an email in?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, that part we can't do, but exactly, we can answer in the sense of speaking about whatever people write about.
Yeah, and in the beginning we even said, hey, somebody sent an episode with the number, even there was no content in there because we were super happy. Now we don't mention that every time this happens, but we still really appreciate it.
Very much so.
Did I do a good job?
I think so. I think you went into more detail than I have in a while, but that's because you're new to doing it.
Because I did it for the first
exactly,
time.
and I've been I've gotten kind of used to it, and I just speed through it. It's good enough.
And maybe we have new listeners.
Maybe it's always possible.
Or old listeners had completely forgotten, and now we're like, oh yeah, we should send an email.
Yes, indeed. So, thank you for that, Dirk, and thank you very much for listening to our tests from the future. And we'll see you in 200 years.
Bye bye.